All right, welcome to episode 7 for Intro to Python. Today we will be covering Python Booleans. So in programming, you often need to know if something is true or false, and that's what a Boolean value is. You can evaluate any expression in Python and get one of two answers, true or false. So when you compare two values, the expression is evaluated and Python returns the Boolean answer. So we'll just go ahead and demonstrate this. We'll just say 1 is less than 3. We'll print something that is false or should be false. Let's see what we get. And then we'll print 3 greater than 1. Okay, so if we save that, we come up to our terminal. And we come in, we run 7.py. Let's see, can't open file. Oh, great. I'm having. Oh, okay. So if you run into an issue like this, I decided to put everything in folders, and I forgot that I decided to put everything in folders. So I need to cd into this file. Now we can run it. And you see true, false, false. So sometimes I like to just kind of work through issues like that, like those error messages in real time, just so you can kind of see. So I broke up, I added files, as you can see, for all my videos. As we're getting more and more videos, I didn't just want one giant folder with a ton of files that made it kind of hard to skip from what I guess I could call a chapter to chapter. So I broke it down in files. Now, if your CD means change directory, so you can do like ls anytime you're in, and it will show you all the files in there. If it's a folder, like we saw up here, so up here you can see these directories, right? So there's no files, they're directories. And then I was able to type cd. Let me expand this a little bit. So just a real quick thing. And then since I have a space in the name, you have to put it in quotes. Normally you do not do that, and that's a good reason to keep folders and file names really basic. I sometimes violate that rule, and in this series I am violating that rule, but that's why I had to put a string literal, like we covered earlier in the series, in there. And you can see here, this is not a directory. See how it has the A? So it is not a directory, so you can't cd, you can't change directory into it. We'll get into more terminal commands, but cd and ls are very good to know. And then of course, you guys know, like the Python and file name to run any file. So again, we have true, false, false, because 1 is less than 3, 8 does not equal 7, and 3 is not less than 1. So that's one. Now you can also do like a conditional in Python. So we can just, actually let's comment those out in case you want them as notes. And then so here we'll just kind of make some variables. We'll just set like x equal to 100, y equal to 50, and then we'll say if x is greater than y. So this is a conditional statement, and so we're kind of getting used to this now. So we have this if statement here of if x is greater than y, then we want to print something, and we'll print x is greater than y, and I should lowercase that just to be consistent. So there's a condition. Now with an if, you can also do an else statement. So we have else right here, and notice that the indentation is the same as the if part, and the print is indented. And again, we will indent this print also, and then we will say x is not greater than y. Right, so we will do that. And then we can go ahead and run this. We'll save, run it. And you see that it returned x is greater than y. So it returned that based on this conditional. It said x is greater than y because 100 is greater than 50. And so it prints this, and it stops. It doesn't even run this block because it doesn't have any reason to run the else. So if we were to change the value to let's say 10. Now we'll run it, and you see x is not greater than y. So it evaluates, is x greater than y? No. So then it skips anything that's in here. So we can do something like this just to show you that it is not printing no matter what we put under here. So then when we save and run, you can see that it says I ran under the else statement. So the if statement skips everything that's inside of it and just jumps to the else because this condition is false. So it's using a Boolean value to see if it's true or false. So if only runs if true, else only runs if true in this syntax. So then it prints x is not greater than y, and I ran under the else statement. So that's a way to do a conditional. These are called conditional statements, these if else. And then we can evaluate values and variables with Booleans in Python. So we'll cover that really quick. Cut that out, save, move on. All right, so here's kind of an interesting thing you can do. So bool, as we covered earlier, I believe, is a method. I don't know if we covered that or not, but I think we did. So this is a function, and it will give you a true or false value for anything that you put in. So we can just put a string in here, save that, and we can execute that, and you see true. So most things come back as true if they have something inside of it. So with strings, and now it's false. So you can kind of like mess around with these and see what kind of results you get. So even a space, even a blank character comes back as true. Another one you can do is you can do like an integer. So 15 comes back as true, 5 comes back as true, and then something like 0 comes back as false. So this is important to know because sometimes you make it so things return like a 0, and you see even a negative integer is coming back as true. So it's important to know that 0 is false, and keep that in mind because later on you might use that in a bigger app. It is something that you do where you say if something evaluates to 0, then it's no good. So you can set stuff that way. I guess I can leave this in case you want to mess around with it. So we just have the print bool function, the print function, and the bool function inside of it as an argument. And then you can of course do them as variables as well. Like we could just assign hello or the string whatever to like x. We could just do string here and y equals 10 or whatever we want, and we can do print bool x and print bool y, and then we can save, execute that, and we see true and true because they have values, and again true and false for a 0 or an empty string. Both of those will go back to false. So like I said, most values are true. Almost any value is evaluated to true if it has some sort of content. Any string is true except for empty strings. Any number is true except 0. Any list, tuple, set, or dictionary are true except for empty ones. So we can do like a list really quick. We'll just comment this out again for simplicity's sake, and then we'll just say print bool, and we'll just build like a list. We'll just say apple, banana, and then save, run, and you see that it's true. So some values come back as false. This is kind of an important thing to know. So some of the ones that come back as false are the word false. So if you do this, print bool false, and you're passing in false, you see that it's false. Okay. Another one is none. The argument none. So we see that that's false. We already covered that 0 is false, so remember that. We covered that an empty string is false. Empty parentheses are false. right? So this is getting into all the tuples, dictionaries, lists, all of that. So this is the list. That would have been the tuple. By the way, the parentheses are the tuple. We'll get into that. False there, and then dictionaries. So you see that any of those being empty gives us a falsy value inside of the Boolean. If you have an object from a class with a dunder lang function that returns 0 or false, it will also be false. And this is, we'll get into dunders later, but basically I'm just going to go over the example on W3 schools because it's a good example. So if we have a class like this and we have this function in it and it's the length, this is called dunder when you have double underscores like this. So that's all we're going to get into right now. And then you have it return 0, right? And then you have like my object equals my class. So don't worry about what all this means right now. Just know that if you have something that returns 0, that you will get a false value. So you see that it returns false. So basically this is an object. This is object-oriented programming, which we'll get into later. Inside this object, it has this function. Inside this function, it will return 0. We are assigning this object. We're making a new object. And then we're seeing if it's true or false inside of there, the Boolean. So just know that that's something you can do if you use it as object-oriented ever to return a false value. You can make it return 0. You can also have functions that return a Boolean value, of course. So like any function, we're going to get into functions more in depth, but anytime you see DEF, that's a function. So we'll just name it like my func for function. We won't take any arguments, and we'll just make it return true, and we'll get into return and all of these things. Thanks, VS Code, for doing that. When you do return a Boolean, it has to be capitalized. That's why it's giving me the error. I forgot to capitalize true. So you always want to type false like this, and you'll see in VS Code that it changes the color of it versus just true, right? Or false. So that means that it's a special word or keyword or phrase. So we'll execute this function. So just like the other functions we've been using, we're making our own function called myfunc right here. So if you remember when we were doing like the string functions, we'd have x dot whatever. Those functions are under the object that is a string, kind of like up here how it has a class. So all that stuff is kind of like an object with its own functions, and we'll get into all of that later. But just so you know, when you write your own function, you still have to execute it with these open and closed parentheses, and we're just calling it. So right here, we're passing this in as an argument, right? And we're just going to print to console or print to terminal the output from this function. This function just returns true, the Boolean. So that's just scraping the surface, but we'll just execute that, and you'll see it even lagged a little bit. So the first time we ran it, it was a little bit slow, which is funny because it shouldn't be that slow. But anyway, it's probably from this. VS Code just importing stuff for me. So yeah, so that's a very basic function, obviously. And if you want, you can mess around with functions or whatever, but we'll get into them. We'll definitely be writing plenty of functions. You can also have something that has a function, just like this myfunc right here. Actually, I'll just uncomment it, and I think we'll just comment out this print. We'll just keep that function for there, and then we can also say like this. So if myfunc, pass in an argument, and then the conditional like we did before, and we could have it print something, or else we could have it print no, right? And then we can execute this, and you'll see the yes, because it's saying if this is true, right? So if myfunc print yes, So there's a operator, which is an exclamation point, which means not, and you will see that pop up too. Like inside of things, you'll see it pop up where it makes something kind of the opposite, right? Like, so if it's not whatever, which in this case, if it's returning true, so if it's not true, then do something else. So we'll get into all of that stuff later. You'll see those. But in this, it's saying if my func, so it's executing this function up here. This function is returning true to this if statement. So it's saying if true, do this, and it is true. It's getting true back from my func, from this return value. So then it's moving on to print yes, right? So if we change this to false, you'll see what happens, and it's no. So just keep that in mind. If any of this is too confusing, don't worry. We will definitely be covering conditionals more in depth, and we will be covering functions more in depth. But I have a feeling that you're probably understanding it, and I'm probably over explaining it. So if that's the case, please let me know as well, and I can move along a little bit quicker. So Python also has things that return Boolean values that we covered with kind of like the string methods and functions that we covered earlier. So there's one function which just for example does this, which is instance. So I'll just show you kind of what that does. So if we have like x equals 10, and then we want to print is instance right here, and then we put x int. And what this is doing is it's going to check to see if the variable that we're entering as our first argument is the type of the second argument. So it's comparing the type of this variable to the type that we entered, which is an integer. And 10 is an integer, so we should be getting a true value back, and we do. Right, so then if we do string, and we save that, and we run it, we're getting false. So that's just a nice built-in function, and this pretty much covers Booleans and their uses in depth, and so we'll move on to something else.